It's been a while since we just sat down and talked, and not just science, but a real talk. Dose of the serum. In my opinion, I think I've said this a few times. I think that makes this channel special. Not just the analysis, which is cool, and we got some great pieces of analysis out there, but this type of thing is lacking, and hopefully, and not just on the channel, but in general, in like the boxing space and combat sports as a whole. So hopefully I can get more of it. So let's get into it. We're going to talk about, as the title suggests, boxing as a circus, as a spectacle, and as a profound aspect of humanity. And the circus is going to be related to recent events, AJ and Jake Paul, which we will get into very shortly. And the spectacle is going to kind of connect to the profound and the circus. It's kind of like that middle ground. And then we're going to talk about Terence Crawford, who's going to represent the profound, the meaningful aspect of boxing, but since he's retiring. The video on Crawford was going to come first, and it was going to be its own individual piece. It was going to be one of the yellow videos. If you don't know, the yellow videos are essentially discussion videos, short videos. And it's because I thought I could add something of value, like the day that he retired, but so much busy life stuff going on. And I also wanted to drop this podcast on Christmas, but again, you know, a bunch of different stuff that gets in the way. But we'll talk about Crawford at the end, and then it'll all make sense, because there's a lot of important stuff that not just about Crawford himself. That's the key thing. And Jake Paul versus AJ isn't just about Jake Paul versus AJ. That's kind of the point of today. But let's get into the substance of it. The thing that I give Jake the most credit for is pulling off the type of stuff that almost everybody, including me, years ago thought was delusional. When he first started making a splash, doing all the, because if you are any somewhat interested in YouTube and are younger, you knew Jake Paul as like a goofy influencer dude. And then there was the whole rise in influencer boxing, and he started making his own way and really separate himself from everything else. And he started calling out Conor McGregor and Canelo, and at the time that he was doing that, it was absurd. But this is, you know, thinking he would get a fight with Conor McGregor, let alone, you know, a Gervonta Tank Davis or Anthony Joshua or Terence Crawford, who he had opportunities to fight all of them. He was in the talks to fight all of them and just fought Anthony Joshua. I mean, as far as giving him credit, he pulled off some stuff that at least I can say I had absolutely no belief that he would be able to pull off. Which is not just impressive, but it's insane. But remember, boxing is in part a circus. And most of the praise for Jake Paul is about to stop right there. Because now we get deeper into the substance of what happens, what happened in the fight, what's happening, who Jake is, what he represents, and just that fight, which I don't even call it a fight, and I don't think most people do. Because really what it was AJ and Jake moving around the ring on a late Miami evening, Friday night, you know, that's really what that was. In defense of AJ not looking the best, I have a few points to address, because I do think AJ didn't look good. I also think he wasn't that serious, but I still think that certain high level quality of boxers can be unserious and still look like a ridiculously high level boxer. I don't think that's what AJ looked like. I think he looked more like a bruiser and a monster, which, to be fair, when you are that much bigger and you're Anthony Joshua, you can get away with that. One of the things is AJ didn't want to embarrass himself. I think that's a very overlooked aspect, considering the fact that they were throwing real punches at each other, and Jake Paul landed his classic overhand. It's very effective overhand if you're like over 50 or under 200 pounds. It's, oh man, that overhand right there, you know, that's like a Mike Tyson uppercut. if you're, geriatric or tiny. But AJ didn't want to embarrass himself and get caught by a goofball, right? And because even that single punch, that single good punch that Jake Paul landed, because it was a good punch, even though he closed his eyes and looks towards the ground when he throws, and he looks like he's doing one of those professional swimming techniques. But I forgot what I was gonna say, because I was just visualizing the fact that he we'll save that for later. AJ didn't want to get embarrassed and caught with some goofy stuff, because even if he got wobbled a little bit or knocked off balance or anything looked off, if he got hit by a Jake Paul punch, let alone getting knocked down or knocked out, which obviously that wasn't really in the cards, but the possibility was there enough for AJ to be cautious and show Jake Paul some respect. Not because Jake Paul's good, he's not, but because that's a grown man who's 216 pounds that can at least throw one punch good, and he's dangerous enough to make AJ not want to get embarrassed by get himself in trouble with a relative bum, right? He also said, this is what Anthony Joshua said, he also said that he wanted to break Jake Paul's spirit, take his soul, and he would do that over several rounds. And I think that's important to mention, because that's exactly what happened. But also, which we'll get into further into the discussion, is that this fight revealed a lot about Jake Paul's character. And when I said that praise was the end for Jake Paul, that's because I got a lot to say about who he is and who he showed himself to be. But in slight defense of Jake Paul, I think it made sense for him to run. I don't, I'm not gonna fault him for running for his life, because when he got hit with the first clean punch of the fight, because a lot of shots he was barely pulling away, they was kind of grazing, they was somewhere in. The first flush punch that hits him, his jaw shatters and his teeth get shoved into his tongue. So it's understandable wanting to run when Anthony Joshua is chasing you down. Anthony Joshua wasn't chasing him down. He was more Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, just walking him down, honestly. Which, that again, you could tell AJ was not necessarily playing. Yeah, he was playing with his food. I was gonna find a different way to say it, but that's what it was. He was walking him down. That's part of the spectacle, to have this big old Nigerian UK monster that Americans are learning about for the first time again. But have this guy come in here and just be on a different level, and have Jake Paul running around for his life. I mean, that's why Martin versus Hearns was so entertaining. I say that like it's a real fight, but it's as much of a real fight as this was. Talking about Jake Paul's character, I find it so difficult to be one of those people that looks at that performance and says, well, you got to give Jake Paul credit. He got in there, he was brave. That's very tough. That's absurd for a few reasons. There's about 98 million of them, but outside of those 98 million, the old men that Jake Paul cherry picked and beat up and bullied and took advantage of, and they got paid too, but we don't have the same kind of, oh, how brave of them. We don't have that same Make-A-Wish vibe that we have with Jake Paul. They showed more valiant attitudes and heart than him. When they were getting beat up, did they dive at Jake Paul's legs? Did they there's some jokes that could be made there, but I'm trying to stay on the track. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to keep everything organized, but my brain is telling me, that's what I'm thinking right now. There's a lot of jokes flowing through my head, but because AJ's on the screen laughing, they came to actually show heart, right? Okay, Jake got in there. Jake did throw some serious punches. He really did believe potentially he could hurt AJ. But at the same time, anytime that man got grazed with a shot around his head, if he got hit on the shoulder and his shoulder bumped into his face, he was diving at AJ's legs. Like when if you ever seen Animal Planet, when wolves approach the deer and like the baby deer goes behind the mother's legs, like that's what he was doing. He really was, you know, it was like a fight or flight, fetal position type of response. And I could also mention that running is a great strategy to survive, especially if you don't get warned for it, which you don't really get warned for it in boxing. You can run around the ring and all of a sudden somebody who's way better than you in just about every way is going to struggle to, you know, handle that. And Jake Paul has trash feet. That's one thing about him. But still, AJ, who's not trying to overextend himself and is not trying to force the issue, and he has to worry about Jake Paul throwing those goofy overhands, which they may be goofy, but they are still dangerous. I mean, that was a good strategy from Jake, and it's a good strategy in general, which is why some fighters will fall onto that strategy of running. And there could be a conversation to be had about that, but we've talked about running before on this channel. AJ's AJ's stylistic approach was interesting because AJ didn't feint, he barely jabbed, he barely threw body shots. I mean, you know, at first when people were trying to say that AJ was taking it easy or he wasn't really serious, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, he looked kind of serious to me because he threw some serious shots. But then at the same time, I thought about what AJ is capable of, and I thought about the entirety of his skill set. And like the more I thought about it and the more reflected on it, I was like, yeah, AJ, that was not a serious performance. One guy was fighting for his life or running for his life, and the other guy was trying to be the careful big brother. And the big brother little brother analogy is actually perfect because I was the little brother, technically still am, but physically bigger now, with no shade to my brothers. But I was the little brother who was much younger than his older brother, and there's like this weird dynamic where the older brother is so much bigger, stronger, faster, better in every way, but the younger brother is still dangerous. He might grab a weapon, he might do this or that, he's crazy, he might bite. These are all things I would do and did do. But my point is, even if you are far better in every way, there's still that danger of not wanting, like, you want to control him and stop him, but you also don't want to hurt him too soon in this case, and you also don't want to get hurt. So you're like balancing all these elements. The fight was easy for Jake Paul because he wasn't fighting. He was running and diving and ducking and dodging. It's like the 5 Ds of dodgeball. I can't remember the exact phrase, but that's from a movie, Dodgeball Underdog. He was doing everything. You know, he was, you know, see, there's some non-YouTube appropriate jokes that are going through my head, and I'm trying to filter those out. But that's what Anthony Joshua was having to do. He was having to filter out, okay, don't break his jaw yet, don't crush his ribs, because Jake Paul got hit with like 2 good body shots. I saw him make a face that he almost wanted to dive right there. He was, man, you know, I think there was a lot of women jealous of Jake Paul that he was able to get so close to Anthony Joshua in that way on that many occasions, and it almost wasn't even safe for Netflix. I mean, they would have had to put an 18+ warning. But a small piece of credit to Jake Paul, although I almost don't want to say this because he's so delusional about his capabilities. He's actually pretty physically durable. I don't know about that body, like I said, with those body shots, but I think he has a good chin, like good, decent, you know. I don't know how it would fare at heavyweight, but if he's fighting people more his size, I think it wouldn't be that bad. Now, well, you know, now things might be different because this whole shit got shifted. I mean, now his literal chin is, the real estate is you know, but that's a whole separate thing. But he also kind of, the reason why I'm so hesitant to give him credit is because he thinks he has a better chin than Francis Ngannou. Where Francis Ngannou fell into several right hands and got up, and then, you know, got knocked out after like the third, you know, big right hand, or fourth, I don't even remember. But Jake Paul took one, and his whole facial structure shifted, and this dude needs titanium plates and screws. But yeah, durability in terms of not being out unconscious. Obviously not durability in terms of his face staying in a proper state. But here's where we kind of expand the conversation. Circuses rely on spectacle. They rely on extraordinary events happening in front of your eyes, and some suspension of disbelief in particular circumstances, and kind of this overall engagement with the audience, so that the audience can absorb all the crazy shit that's being performed in front of them. By design, a circus is not a serious ordeal. That doesn't mean you can't get serious, right? Like trapeze artists can fall from the ceilings. You know, sometimes the tiger or the lion can take a chunk out of the handler. Sometimes Jake Paul can get his jaw refurbished, right? There's serious aspects to this, but here's the part that a lot of people don't want to accept about boxing. The spectacle, it's not new to this modern era of boxing. Like this, there is like a TikTokification of boxing that is, you know, modern, but the inherent aspect of circuses intersecting with spectacle, which intersects with the real thing, the real boxing, like our real greats and people that can actually do this at a high level. This is real. Like even before Muhammad Ali, they had celebrity sparring matches and exhibitions with, I think Jack Dempsey was one of the first to do that. And Muhammad Ali obviously fought Antonio Inoki, and George Foreman fought 3 dudes in one night. My point is, there's been all kinds of goofy, what we would say, you know, non-serious shit attached to the sport. And goofy is not necessarily bad. It can be. It just means not serious, not profound, like the stuff that we'll get into later. We have plenty of profound people that participate in the circus aspect, and sometimes it might upset the serious fans when the serious aspects of boxing get muddled with the circus aspects of boxing. And I do think that distinction should be made. There is a difference between being upset that the circus exists at all and being upset that the circus is kind of bleeding into the serious aspects of boxing. Like Jake Paul fighting a bunch of MMA fighters, you know, in his own time. That's more of an MMA problem, if anything, if there is a problem to be had. Or Jake Paul fighting other influencers, that's its own separate entity. I do think there is a tangible difference between Jake Paul fighting all of them and him getting the opportunity to bring his circus over to the likes of a Terence Crawford or a Tank Davis or Anthony Joshua or a Canelo, because then there's this legitimization of the circus, and maybe the circus shouldn't be legitimized, and if it is to be legitimized, maybe it shouldn't be legitimized to that level, and kind of mix and match with the real legitimate stuff, the thing that makes boxing, you know, beautiful, the thing that, you know, elevates it, the profound. The beautiful thing about circus is that it can also have theater, and that's part of the spectacle. Theater, right? One thing Jake Paul mastered was dancing on the line of just a goofy Disney kid that doesn't know what he's doing, and the character of a supervillain, a-hole that you all will hate to or love to hate, and would want to watch him fight just so you could hope the right person will come around and break his face. Because when people prey on your downfall, they're investing energy into you. And when they invest energy, eventually they invest attention, and attention equals money in modern society. Every story needs a villain. Just like every play, or every play needs an antagonist. There's conflict, because conflict is integral to a good story. And that's why the biggest fights in history have narratives behind them. There's a backdrop of something between the fighters, a history, emotional baggage, whatever have you. Like, speaking of Ali and Foreman, the reason why that fight is arguably the biggest fight ever. I mean, you have you have somebody who's not supposed to win, somebody who's too old, he's not strong enough, versus a monster, a conqueror, somebody who's unbeatable. He crushed everybody else that gave Ali trouble. And you have Ali who's talking and doing all this crazy stuff, and there's all this promotion. I mean, there's a story there. There's meaning there. There's some profound stuff there. And it becomes even more profound when the downtrodden protagonist proves himself to be as great as he believed and proclaimed. There's story there. There's meaning behind George Foreman's career becoming two different people, and so on and so forth. But we're going to get into that later because there's a comparison between George Foreman and Terence Crawford. Jake, by design and by choice and by action, more importantly, is a villain. He's a bully, and that's why there has been a universal breath of fresh air and happiness upon the spectacle of him being put on his ass. But that's what he wants. He thrives in that. Now, I don't think he wanted to get his jaw broken necessarily, but he enjoys being the guy that everybody hates, because he knows that means everybody will tune in. It's one thing to play a villain, though. It's another to behave as one. Jake Paul, and this is kind of the point I was getting at earlier, talking about why he doesn't get the same respect as people that he's beat up, or why he shouldn't be praised for what he did on that late Friday evening out in Miami with Anthony Joshua. Because that's really it was like an ordeal. I'm not gonna call it a fight. It was like an ordeal. It was a circus. It was, touch butt in the park, as some people might say, in the ring, if you want to. He did. Some people will give him respect, right? But when an undersized basketball player or an old MMA fighter who's also undersized, or all of these people who have all these disadvantages relative to him in these situations, when they were in trouble, they probably have fear, they were hurt, so on and so forth. They were in the same situation that Jake Paul was in. How many of them groveled at his legs? How many of them ran for their lives? How many of them performed and or behaved as pathetically as he did when he was confronted with the same disadvantages that he put onto everyone else? Now we're getting somewhere. That's character. And that's his real character, despite him trying to play a character that's kind of similar but kind of different, because that's the thing that people do nowadays. Real character is revealed, right? And that doesn't mean that he can't be brave in some aspects, because just stepping in the ring is brave. People die in boxing, especially if they I won't say in situations like these, because normally people die when in what we would call entertaining fights, and there's a whole discussion that could be had there about deaths in boxing and what usually causes them and stuff like that. But regardless, boxing is a very dangerous sport. So it's brave just to step in there regardless of the monetary benefit, because you may not even live to see that money, right? Throwing an overhand right in the midst of danger, that's brave, right? And people want to live in a black and white world where things are simply this or simply that. But one thing you'll learn, especially if you aren't afraid to acknowledge complexity, is that simplicity for the most part is an illusion. Jake Paul is not just simply a coward or simply a villain, and he's not just simply a hero or simply brave. There's elements of both intertwined. Now, he's mostly a coward and a villain, at least in this instance. But you know, there were things that were brave about this performance, and there were things that were cowardly about this performance. But, you know, like I said, some of that is understandable considering he's in there with a 6'6", 250-pound, two-time unified champion who was better than him in every physical and mental way. And like, when you think about it, the situation that he's in is like the hyperbole that somebody draws up when they're telling you, would you do this for $1 million if you're in there with somebody 7 foot tall, 300 pounds that can punch like a truck? I mean, that's almost exactly what Anthony Joshua is. I mean, he is the hyperbole of the most terrifying scenario. But, you know, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, as a former opponent of Jake Paul once said. Although sometimes it's a little bit more specific than that. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face with the right punch from the right person in the right circumstance. Then reality sets in. And when reality is incongruent with your delusional expectations, fear sets in soon after. And fear is interesting because some people, when the fear is overwhelming, they run. Some people crumble. Some people freeze. Some people fight. Some people give up. Jake did a mix of all of that. And AJ was the catalyst for that. AJ was the protagonist in the spectacle. But it's weird because normally stories that have protagonists, that are more like Jake instead of AJ. That's like the Ali Foreman example that we gave. Like, you want your protagonist to overcome disadvantages, to overcome challenge. But that's how good Jake Paul was painting himself as a villain. And this was more revenge than it was anything else. The story didn't need those things to work because I think AJ has a beautiful role in boxing. Besides being, you know, one of the greats of this era, now we're gonna get into AJ because there's a lot of interesting stuff I can say about AJ, and I've been an AJ defender for a while now. He's somebody who has been disrespected and, you know, downplayed, and he's also somebody that's beloved by many, especially American women and Black American women at that, as we're finding out once again, you know. But the reason why there's like a resurgence with Anthony Joshua in America is because when he came to America the first time, that's when he got beat up. And so everyone was like, oh, that he was probably gaining traction. And then, you know, he took that left foot to the temple and then people forgot about him. Then he came back over. Everyone's like, oh my God, who is this? And, you know, that's not even related to the conversation. Well, maybe a little bit. It kind of is. AJ is one of my favorite fighters, and I make no gripes about that. Like, I don't try and pretend like it's not the case. That's one thing about me. If I'm biased, I'm going to let you know. I've covered, you know, some examples of him fighting where like I was like, he's more skillful here, and so on and so forth. And that's why I can say that there were no skills on display in the Jake Paul fight. But connecting, you know, the three elements of today's discussion, he is the intersection between the circus, the spectacle, and the profound. Because he's great enough to have an impact on the serious aspect of the sport, right? And he will continue to have that impact because legacy doesn't stop when you stop. That's the whole point of legacy, right? So what AJ has done is historically set in stone. But when there's a mess to be cleaned up on the outskirts of the serious territory, where the circus will come into town, he will go find a Francis Ngannou and he will put him in the dirt. He will go out and find Jake Paul and break his face. And I don't think that that should go without appreciation, especially, and I'm trying to think of the organization of how I want to say this. AJ is one of those people that gets, more disrespect from the serious parts of boxing and the serious discussions of boxing. But I find it strange that same audience that wants to protect the seriousness of boxing doesn't give him the respect he deserves in these cases where, and I should clarify because I'm making it seem like he's a victim. It's like people don't respect him. He doesn't get enough love. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the people that want boxing to be taken more serious, to have more respect, the people that hate the Jake Pauls and they hate the fact that Tyson Fury got dropped by Francis Ngannou, I think they should show the loudest source of appreciation and cheer for AJ should not be from people that hate Jake Paul. It should be from the people that hate what Jake Paul is doing to the reputation of boxing, right? Because AJ is the one who goes out and risk possibly embarrassing himself versus Jake Paul. And that could be very detrimental to the image that he's built as a world-class heavyweight champion, right? If Francis Ngannou drops AJ like how he drops Fury, now AJ looks horrible. He looks, he gets even more disrespect, right? If and if Jake Paul does anything to him, oh man, that's even worse. So there's a massive risk for AJ in that sense. Everybody has risks involved in the situation. Jake Paul risked his jaw, which he lost that bet. But, AJ could have lost a lot of respect, which deservingly so. If Jake Paul does anything to you in your AJ, I mean, even I would come on here and be like, really? But, luckily that didn't happen. AJ is essentially a janitor. He's on janitor duty. And one of the most underappreciated pieces of our society is the people that clean up when nobody's around. And the reason they get underappreciated is because nobody's around. But you only notice that they exist when they don't do their job, because then all the mess is around you. Like, why is nobody cleaning up this mess? Right? AJ is cleaning up this mess that people say they have a problem with. If you want less circus, you got to have these type of people that will pack the circus up. And it's not a pretty job, and it's not a nice job sometimes, although it can be lucrative, as we have discovered. Although he got his shit chopped in half by UK and US taxes, but half of 100 million, who's really complaining? I don't think he is. He got 50 million to dance around with a goofball and break his face. I don't, and hell, I think everybody here watching, not watching, just about everybody that's not, a billionaire or a millionaire, I think we would also take 50 million to get our face broke by Anthony Joshua. So, it's not like he's underpaid like a janitor. let me make that clear. But also inherent to the state of things is trying to find the types of boxers that not only give us the profound performances, but give us the spectacles too, because that is what and what has and what will always take boxing to another level. When you have these big characters with big personalities and backstories and unique fighting styles that fans can get invested into, and then of course when you're invested into something, you share it, and when you share something, it grows, right? So AJ is like I said, at that intersection, but in like the direct intersection between spectacle and profound, you have Crawford. If Crawford is truly retired, I think we're in a very interesting space, because as far as America is concerned, I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. He's kind of the face of boxing, right? After he beat Canelo. Now Canelo will probably sell more pay-per-views, although pay-per-views is kind of a dying thing, but you get the point. But it's not all about number. Being the face is not all about numbers, right? It's also about respect. It's about impact. It's about how you're viewed, not just how much you're viewed. Crawford was already considered for years to be arguably the best fighter in the sport from the serious aspect of boxing, right? Crawford used to just be in the serious aspect of boxing. Just like, Uwe, just like Usyk, where these guys are real hardcore boxing fans would see them on the come up and be like, oh my God, this guy is so skilled, so talented. And they see him go undisputed at their first weight class. And, you got to know a little bit more beyond the surface level to know them prior to them, elevating and becoming even as big as they are now. But Crawford versus Canelo, that reached the territory of profundity and spectacle on the biggest stage, the biggest audience, undisputed. The stakes were, two all-time greats. And again, that's where boxing is at its pinnacle. When you have people that are as serious as it gets, and their legacies have meaning, but there's also a deep and vast appreciation for all of those elements, and all the celebrities come out, and millions of dollars are flowing, and millions of eyes are on the fight. That's when boxing is at its pinnacle, when there's that intersection between the serious and the profound. I don't know why my voice came out the profound, but it's always about those two things, right? A lot of people, and I choose the word spectacle on purpose, because a lot of people use the word spectacle as more of a disparaging term. I wouldn't say an epithet, but a way to kind of separate the real boxing from the goofy stuff. But the reason why they do that is because they associate spectacle with circus. That's why I have the 3 and then the spectacle is in the middle, because I do think it's in the middle. And when you type in spectacle into Google, what you'll see as far as definitions are concerned, one of them is a visually striking display or performance. In other words, what are people willing to drop everything they're doing to turn their gaze away from what they're watching and focus on? Like what will they focus everything on in any given moment, right? What will people take time out of their future schedule to plan for, so that they can invest their time, energy, and eyes onto and into? Boxing being a spectacle isn't a bad thing. In fact, it is the very thing that makes it what it is. But that's only in part, because the other part is greatness. When you have these fighters like Crawford that are cut from a different cloth, and what that looks like to me is being cut from a different cloth, what that looks like is partially brain, mostly, oh no, I got that backwards. Partially body, mostly brain. Now there are some athletes. Now this is the topic that I alluded to in the very beginning, talking about Crawford, but talking about what Crawford represents, talking about what I think makes him special. There are some athletes that are known for being this word called clutch, which essentially means in the most important moments when the pressure is the highest, that these athletes perform the best. In America, the classic example that we all know for reference is Michael Jordan, also Kobe Bryant, another Tom Brady. It's something about the brain of athletes or performers like this that allows them to go up another notch, an extra gear when the pressure mounts and the profundity grows. And the thing is, it's kind of a superpower because most people, when they are confronted with pressure, as we've discussed earlier, they freeze, run away. They generally perform worse in a variety of ways for a variety of reasons. But that's what pressure does to most people. And that's what most people think. Like they think that pressure makes people fold, right? A lot of people say pressure folds. I think it only exposes people. I think that I think it kind of brings out aspects of you that you never really explored, and after you get on the other side of that pressure, you can reflect on it if you are willing to and capable of. To me, Crawford has that it factor. And there are a lot of different versions and explanations and opinions on what the it factor is that makes someone special in any given area. To me, my explanation of what the it factor is the brain's ability to reach another level of efficiency, proficiency, and overall capability in the face of the most intense external and internal pressures. It's kind of like that old trope where there are boxers that are sparring kings, sparring warriors. Like in the gym, they just are, they beat everybody's ass. But then they get into a real fight under the lights with the pressure of the spectacle and the profundity over them. And I'm not gonna say they're trash, but they're trash relative to how well they perform in the gym. Because there's a magic to those lights. There's a magic to the moment. There's a magic to the spectacle, right? It's not as simple as being good or being bad. It's about, in part, how you respond to the pressure of the moments. And that also connects to the reason why someone can look really good on a heavy bag or on pads or in any sort of controlled, calm circumstance. But then when they get in the ring, the technique flies out of the window and everyone's like, why does he look like that? Right? They get punched, again, calling back to Mike. They get punched in the face and the technique and the skills dissolve. It's also in part, I'm going to keep going, build on top of this. It's also in part the same reason why someone can have amazing cardio in all kinds of circumstances, running, jumping, sprinting, jump roping, and even in sparring in the gym. But then when they get in the ring, they gas out in moments. And the mental aspect of having to perform under pressure, it changes everything. But every now and then you'll have this person that comes along that not only fails to experience those diminishing qualities underneath the pressure of their biggest challenges and biggest moments, but quite the opposite. They rise to the occasion. They become even better, uh, and they they're calm and they're at home in that environment. To me, Crawford is not just a throwback fighter. He's cut from the cloth of a certain type of athlete, a certain type of fighter. This is true for football, basketball, hockey, whatever you wanna think of. There are people who are able to thrive while everyone else falters. And to me, that's it. Now, that's not all of it, because Crawford is also a very physically gifted athlete in just about every area: coordination, feet, hand-eye coordination, speed, power, explosiveness, endurance, strength, cardio. He's an all-around package also, which most all-time greats are in what they're great at. But I need a drink of water. Hold up. Give me a second. In any given activity or sport, where there is substantial skill, like there's a skill ceiling and skill impacts your performance heavily, I don't think it will be possible for somebody to give me or anyone an example of a true all-time great in that activity or sport whose mind is not exceptional in that regard, or in other regards that are at least tangentially related. Meaning, whether you take Gary Kasparov or Magnus Carlsen from chess, whether you take Terence Crawford or Tom Brady or Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan, or like, you can go down the gambit of great athletes or people that have a very high skill activity, competitive activity. I don't think you'll be able to show me somebody who's an all-time great that isn't one of those people that doesn't have that thing in their brain. That's why I say, to me, that's the it factor. If Crawford is retiring, I think he has every right to. And as much as I would like to see him fight more, because we rarely get to see fighters, it's such a great opportunity to see someone this good at what they do, let alone just fighting. If you love fighting, it's even more special. But to see Tom Brady play when I was a kid, and I didn't like Tom Brady and I didn't like the Patriots, but then when I grew older, I was like, oh my God, I'm watching somebody who it's even crazy when you think about it like this. This is true for Crawford, Floyd, Jordan, Brady. You can go down a list of greats. Boxing or football, there are millions and millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people across history that try to participate in this thing to the best of their ability, right? And even if you just say on the highest level, only millions, to be the one that's considered the best out of all of those people who were picked from level to level to level to be better than the last and better than this group and better than that group, for you to be at the pinnacle, the mountaintop, I mean, that's insane to witness. And we've been able to witness that. You can witness it with Floyd, we witness it with Roy Jones, Ali. We had these people that are like really, really special. I think we have some active right now. Usyk, Uwe, so on and so forth. Bam is potentially going to be up there. So, there's some names, but there's a privilege to watching someone like Crawford. And we have some in other sports. Patrick Mahomes, LeBron, Steph Curry, Shohei Ohtani. Like, boxing is just like football, because I remember being told when I played a little bit of football, when I was young, and it's true, and it's even more true at the highest level. Boxing is just like football, and football is just like boxing in the sense to where if your mind and heart are not fully invested in competing, then you should probably stop, because that little bit of hesitation is the difference between a regular Terence Crawford performance and him getting caught with something and knocked out, or him getting dropped, or him being just off enough to lose a fight and not be undefeated anymore, and that affects his legacy, so on and so forth. Boxing, and to me this is probably one of the things I love about boxing the most, it requires your full attention inside the ring and out. Like, for if you are, off your game for half a second or even less, half a second of, distraction could turn into 10 minutes of unconsciousness, or even worse, it could turn into a coma, or brain bleed, or even more subtly, it could turn into a wobble situation where all of a sudden you put your hands in your pockets and you get outboxed. Right? There's so many ways things could go wrong, and you have to be on point for 36 minutes. Right? My favorite thing about Crawford and his mind is I have a history of calling him a savant, because there are some athletes, and I've been a little bit disorganized in this latter part, but I'm trying to connect a whole bunch of pieces together. It's like this big vast net of meaning and information that Crawford is kind of in the center of. But I, from the history of this channel, I've called Crawford a savant, because there are some athletes, if you watch it, if you have an eye for it, that in that given sport or position that they play, you can see the art and the science being weaved together in such a way that it's almost more musical than it is physical. You know how when you listen to exceptionally good music for the first time and you get caught off guard, and then it like transports you to a different dimension, different place, and it's like this unexplainable understanding, which those two things seem paradoxical, but it is like a thing that happens to us where it's like we can't explain it, but we understand it. There are some boxers that I watch fight, and some fighters in general outside of boxing, where fighting is just as natural as dancing or walking or breathing. And because they're able to scientifically express themselves in such a unique and simultaneously efficient and effective way, it looks like they're playing a whole different game than their opponents, in many ways they are. When I say someone like Crawford is a savant, I mean that I I think who he is perfect for boxing. I think he found the exact thing that he was supposed to do, right? And that's very rare. I heard him one time compared to like a jazz musician or like jazz music, and I thought that was perfect because there's a uniqueness to his rhythm that, like, his tempo ebbs and flows, and he in some ways he's more like an animal than like a guy who's trying to box. He's an artist. uh he he's an artist that with a martial tinge and not just a martial artist. It's hard to explain. Like I said, I think when um I first started getting into boxing, he was the first fighter that I really saw, because there's like a point where you get into a hobby or something that you come to love and enjoy, and there's like the stage of ignorance where you don't really know what you're watching, but you really like it. And then you slowly start to understand what you're watching as you understand the patterns and the pieces and the techniques and the behaviors and the psychology. And like when you start developing the eyes to see the intricate details, it opens up a world. And Crawford, I think, was the first fighter I saw where I was like, he's different. He's the way he's doing stuff, it's not It's not like any of these other guys. In that way, Bud was a crucial catalyst for this channel and how I do things and what the sweet science means to me. Right? When we're talking the sweet science lab, I mean, he's one of the original case studies. Quite literally, because the second, I think it was either the second or third like big coverage was Spence and Crawford, and at the same time I was doing Inoue and Fulton, and I picked Crawford to beat Spence, and we'll get into that later. I think that might also explain why I would always defend Crawford in terms of his pound for pound ranking, because when I did that one Three Kings video talking about Usyk, Inoue, and Crawford, I was like, each of them have an argument to be number one pound for pound, right? But I would say I think Crawford is the best one out of them. And what I meant by that is, I should clarify also that my favorite boxer is Inoue, right? And then I also said Usyk at the time deserves to be number one, or I said he had the best argument to be number one. And despite that, I said I think Crawford is the best. And the reason why I would say that is because that's what my brain was processing. It's not just film study or techniques, it's art. And that doesn't mean that other fighters aren't artists, right? Or that they aren't special. Obviously, those other two men are very, very special. And they have their own thing going on. It's just my eyes in particular immediately attached to what he does, how he does it, why he does it. And I picked against him versus Canelo. I thought Canelo would catch him. But it's funny because this is how it's all going to tie together. Throughout the history of this channel, I've kind of talked about, and this is a thing that has followed Crawford throughout his career. People say he gets hit too much, and he gets into brawls and exchanges that are generally considered unnecessary. And it's funny because when I talked about George Foreman, I made a point of discussing his transition from a fighting man to a man who fights, from a beastly guy to a guy who can tap into that beast when necessary. And that's a big deal, right? Again, the profundity of boxing is that it's not just two men throwing punches at each other. And it never was just that. Now that's the spectacle of it in part. That's a big part of the spectacle. I mean, people want to see the violence. They want to see people throwing punches. They want to see two tough, strong, fast, capable men going to war. But I'm gonna get another sip of water because my mouth is getting dry. But it's also the fact that when you take somebody like Crawford, who in my eyes has had a flaw of being too haphazard in some of his fights, what I said was, I was like, I think he's going to be too skillful for Canelo. I think he's going to do this to him and that and this and that. He's going to do that and this and that. And a lot of those this and that's I was completely correct on, like down to the exact round and moments. There was like a lot of specific details I got right. But that kind of shows how much I grew to understand the intricacies of his style and Canelo's style at that. But the biggest thing I got wrong, and the most crucial thing I got wrong, is something related to his character, something related to his ability to remain disciplined, to remain in control, and again, the it factor. The biggest fight of his life, the most meaningful fight of his life, and you could argue Errol Spence, I'm not mad at that, but I'm just saying this is a very big deal, right? When the pressure is on 100, I get so many things right about what he's going to do and why. The one thing that changes everything in terms of my prediction that I get wrong is related to the type of man he is, right? Not just the type of boxer, but the type of man he is. Being a man is so heavily tied to being able to recognize your own mistakes and going down the path to fix them. Crawford knew and he knows who he is, right? If everybody else in the world knew that he gets into too many dangerous exchanges and he gets caught sometimes, I mean, what do you think he knew, right? If that was a running narrative from other people that aren't him, and he's someone whose job is dependent on self-awareness, self-evaluation, and self-fixing, how much do you think he thought about that? And he's explored, I wouldn't say solutions, but he's explored what that means and what he can do to address it. What's interesting about boxing is, as much as your coach can tell you, hey, bring your jab back to your guard after you throw it. Hey, don't get into a brawl. Don't get into the exchange. Don't stay in a 50-50. Hey, pivot out when you throw that right hand, so on and so forth. Your coach can give you all kinds of advice in the corner and in the fight. At the end of the day, it's up to you to implement it. That's always the nature of boxing. It's always up to you. That's one of the things that also makes boxing special. It's you. You are doing it. You have a great team behind you. You have great sparring partners, all kinds of things, but you have to perform. So in my mind, I thought, since Crawford had did it so many times before, did it meaning get into brawls and exchanges, get caught with shots that he shouldn't be getting caught with. I was like, he'll do it a few too many times in the fight, and eventually Canelo's gonna catch him with something. Not because Crawford isn't better than Canelo, but because Crawford has that flaw. And it's funny because all the glaze that I've given Terence Crawford over the history of this channel, and he may be the most glazed fighter, him or Ino Uwe. It's even more funny when you think I picked him to beat my second favorite boxer, Errol Spence, from the same city as me. With all of that factored in, my final prediction of Terence Crawford was the one in which he proved me wrong. But that's kind of who he is. That's who he is, right? He finds himself in disadvantaged situations, fighting under companies that don't like him or want to promote him or don't believe in him or appreciate him, fighting champions on short notice, being like locked out of divisions, coming in to spar a world champion without any sort of help or coaching or anything like that. He is in many ways the character that Jake Paul likes to paint himself to be. Jake is trying to build up his own character. I don't know where I was going to go right there, but it's interesting because the circus, the spectacle, the profound. Circus is put on appearances. The profound really is it, right? Terence really is that guy. Crawford is the guy who will prove you wrong because you see a skinny, lanky kid with long arms and like a big head relative to his body. He got that little skinny body. And this isn't applicable right now because he's buff, but when he was younger, you see him, you'd be like, what is this dude doing? And he'll just piece you up and bust you up and then knock you out. And then you're like, what just happened? He's the guy that proves you wrong. And it's not just because he's physically gifted, it's because mentally he has that ability to overcome, not just because he's mentally tough, but because he's mentally locked in. mistakes that have been made time and time again. When the time arrives for him to prove to himself and to others who he's supposed to be and who he wants to be, he is profound. He is masterful. Those exchanges and brawls that I expected him to get into were, non-existent in those portions of the fight that I thought they would show up in. And that's because he's the guy that finds the solution when it matters most. Right? That is the profundity of boxing. That's also the spectacle. That's the everything. Right? What? That's the everything. It's hard to say it a different way or a better way. That like when you look at Terence Crawford, look how far he's come. Look at the things he's overcame. Look how talented and gifted he is. But look how much he also cares about his talents and his gift. And look how much he sharpens and hones it. And then look at how much his mind is important to what he can do with his body. I mean, that's it. And then he carries it from the backyard to the biggest stage possible against the biggest fighter with all of this stuff, right? That is boxing. That's what they make Rocky about. That's what they make Creed about. That's the theater. But see, the best pieces of theater are attached to reality because that's what stories do anyways. Those fictitious stories only help us love and understand and accept the real reality more, despite them not being true. But when you have theater in real life, what it is just the life stories of the people involved. And Terence Crawford's boxing story and his life story is the profound aspects of boxing and the spectacles of boxing fused into one. And that also is what makes someone immortal, to live beyond death, right? Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Sugar Ray Robinson, Joe Louis. These are names that are endless because their legacies are endless. That is the immortality serum. The name, right? The name of this channel. That is what has always been, the essence of what we find important. Profundity, greatness, to live beyond death, right? And like, even if you're just a mailman, you want to invest in certain things and 401k and make sure your kids go to college or whatever else so that they can you live through them. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. And it'll be interesting to see which direction this channel is going to go in 2026. A lot of things slowed down in 2025. I'm very aware of that. And we'll see what happens. And maybe you'll be here, and maybe you won't. I hope Crawford will be there in some regard. I hope he'll show up in some way. I hope we'll get to see a lot of greats, from Bivol, who's on the screen, to Beterbiev, Usyk, Uwe, AJ. I hope we get to see a lot of greatness in the UFC. I hope we get to see a lot of greatness there. I just want to, I want people who are great at what they do to be able to do it, and to get some recompense as well. And hopefully we'll get that, and hopefully I'll be there to cover as much of it as I can. That is all, Fight Scientist. I'm out.